communal defence of rights necessitated a reciprocal duty to others. John Locke was the first to regard natural rights as inalienable, being in his view of our nature, based on our nature as God's creatures. Rights became an aspect of natural law with more or less religious underpinning. For example, in the US Declaration of Independence, we read, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and so on." Then came Tom Paine, and in his Rights of Man, he took a different line again, equally based on natural law, but a secular version of it. He asserted that men are not endowed with rights by any God or Creator, but have them simply by virtue of being human. And he deplored ascribing these rights to any declaration or charter, because he thought, and indeed he was right, that suggests that they can be abrogated as easily as they can be declared. He wrote, "It is a perversion of terms to say that a charter gives rights. It operates by a contrary effect, that of taking rights away. Rights are inherently in all the inhabitants. Individuals themselves, each in his own personal and sovereign right, entered into a compact with each other to produce a government. And this is the only mode in which governments have a right to arise, and the only principle on which they have a right to exist." That is, in Paine's view, the sole purpose of government is to protect the inalienable rights inherent in every individual human being. And as a matter of still current importance, we have human rights not as citizens, but as human beings. You don't have to be a citizen in a country to be able to assert your human rights. So what emerged, despite these differences of view, was a consensus on these lines. First, that individuals have to consent to any political authority over them. Secondly, that the primary function of government is to maintain and protect the natural rights of individuals. And thirdly, therefore, the natural rights of individuals limit the freedom of governments. But there remains the inherent difficulty in understanding the concept of human rights as against legal rights. What does it mean to say, "I have a right to life," as a bandit attacks me? Do we expect the answer, "Oh yes, I've forgotten that, run of it"? What sort of language is the talk of rights? It's variously the language of political theory, or of moral philosophy, or of theology. That may seem problematic, this variety of approaches. Christians may be persuaded by theological argument, but followers of other religions will not be, nor will we. Political theory is a weak basis for any grand prescription, and moral philosophers may be satisfied with their own accounts, but there are many different moral philosophies, as many as there are moral philosophers, in fact, each finding fault with the others. For example, there's the idea that morality is inherent in the way things are, and we can discover what is right or wrong by intuition, or with Kant, that we can discover what is right and wrong, universal moral laws, by the use of reason, or that morals depend on social contract, or that morals are a matter of virtue or character, a matter of intention, not of consequences, or the exact opposite, that morals are a matter of consequences, as with utilitarianism, and so on and so forth. So many great minds have struggled with the problem over thousands of years. They provided wonderful insights, a wonderful vocabulary, a set of concepts, but they haven't come up with a definitive answer. Does that matter? Well, not really, because all the time that these moral philosophers have been disagreeing with each other, people have continued to live decent lives and to have some idea of what they mean by right and wrong. Even when they are acting wrongly, they know they are. So it is with human rights as well. There's no definitive syllogism leading to a conclusion, therefore all human beings have these rights. There's no conclusive knock-down argument that is inescapably persuasive to everyone. In other words, it all comes down to assertion or proclamation and aspiration. The language of human rights is the language not of reason and logic, but of struggle and politics. This should be evident from even a brief look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose 65th anniversary we celebrate this year. Look at the range of rights it deals with. They fall into a hierarchy from the most fundamental to the still controversial. They include the right to life itself, freedom from murder or assault, perhaps the right to material essentials of life and minimum health. And then there's the freedom of thought, expression, belief, association, movement, and so on. And then there's the right to property. And then there's the democratic rights and rights attached to nationality. Then there's the rule of law and justice, fair trial, freedom from arbitrary arrest, and so on. And then there's social and economic and cultural rights, education, work, leisure, and so on. This range of types of rights raises a problem for any view that they are inherent in natural law or in our existence as humans. Is it self-evident that every individual has a right to work and leisure, to education and social security? What sort of right do third world systems have to goods that simply cannot be provided? People have different rights according to where they are born or live. Human rights either entail or derive from respect for human beings as having agency and autonomy, a Kantian view. And they're plainly rights that we have by virtue of being human. But they're not rights that adhere to us in a state of nature. In a state of nature, a fictional concept, of course, we may have unlimited freedom, but we have no rights. Rights are essentially a social arrangement. They express the limits to which we will allow the majority in any community and the authorities in any community to go in restricting the freedoms of the deviant individual minority groups from behaving the way that they wish to. They arise out of the rules and laws imposed by those who have power and the struggle to mitigate the rules that are often arbitrary and unfair or selfish. But the idea of human rights as against legal rights appears only when society has reached a certain stage of progress, when there is sufficient stability and devolution of power for a focus on the individual to be possible as against the entirety of the group community. And the content of human rights develops over time from those basic rights to life, to freedom from torture, fair trials and so on, to the elaborate structure we have today of equality and non-discrimination and possible future development of social and economic rights from a mere aspiration to something more solid. Human rights are expressed, in other words, in the language of aspiration. Of course, the idea of human rights is not without its detractors, its critics or difficulties. They're seen by some as bourgeois, those concerned with big political movements, class struggles, national liberation movements and so on, are willing to accept that individuals may become casualties, their freedoms may be curtailed or denied. They may see concentration on human rights as not just liberal, but effete. And certainly there's nothing in human rights that will protect us against the tragedy of the commons, so-called, that suboptimal or even disastrous result of every individual acting in logical pursuit of his or her own best interests. And there are those critics, notably Islamists and their contrarian and left-wing apologists in the West, who say, demonstrably falsely, that human rights are a Western concept unsuited to other parts of the world. And then again, rights can clash with each other. Notoriously, freedom of religion and belief often clashes with freedom of expression and with the rights of women, of gays, and so on. So we're left with a deeply valued idea of human rights that fail to address the big political picture, that clash with each other, and are underpinned by no compelling argument. Does that mean, as Alistair McIntyre said, there are no such rights, and belief in them is one with belief in witches and unicorns? Or, as Jeremy Bentham said, the talk of human rights is nonsense on stilts. I think not. Indeed, to think that there might have been a definitive argument that would persuade all comers is actually quite unreasonable. For although for us as humanists, human rights are a fundamental part of our life stance, it would be incompatible with our basic outlook, our basic beliefs as humanists, to believe that human rights were the locus for some privileged, some incontestable, perhaps sacred manner of discourse. So let me come to the third part of my remarks, the essential compatibility of humanism and human rights. And as one would expect, given our view of the origin of morality in our existence as social animals, for us, human welfare and fulfillment are socially determined. They're based on the individual in society. Society cannot exist without mutuality. This even seems to be hardwired into us. A young child, closest perhaps we can get to someone untainted by culture, already has a sense of fairness and sharing. Mutuality directly implies the value of the individual, and over time our humanist moral thinking has come to impute value to each individual human on earth, rather than just to an in-group of family or tribe or nation. So humanist morality attaches value and importance to the individual, all the more so because we believe that this is the only life we have. We'll get no pie in the sky when we die. The interdependence of the individual in society implies the duty of the individual to the group, to society, individual responsibility for one's behaviour as it affects the collectivity of society. And cooperation is the basis of living in communities and is also empirically observed to conduce to human welfare, as it does to the welfare of all other social animals. So mutuality is in fact fundamental to all morality, as is seen in the universality of the golden rule, that rule of behaving to others as you would wish them to behave to you. All religions and ethical systems have the golden rule. It surfaces and resurfaces across time and across space as a central proposition of all known religions and non-religious beliefs and codes, demonstrating, you might add in parenthesis, that morality has influenced religion, a great deal modern religion has influenced morality. So we're individually responsible for our own lives and collectively responsible for the future, for everyone, the community and the future of the planet. From this, and from the value we attach to the individual, it follows that we as humanists are strongly committed to human rights. We also have clear views about the organisation of society, especially now that we have such a diverse community, by contrast with the comparative, sometimes exaggerated, uniformity of past ages. And we have views, therefore, on the way that human rights and the individual can be protected in society. We stand for a free, open, and inclusive society, one as George Soros, the founder and funder of the Open Society Foundation. Nobody is in possession of the ultimate truth. Now, in that sort of society, government, law, institutions need to seek the maximum individual freedom while building on common interests so that people can live together constructively. It follows that given the huge variety of beliefs and life stances, religions and beliefs in society today, that has to mean that government and official institutions remain neutral on such questions. There must be no privileges for humanists or for Christians or for any other belief group in society. We call that sort of state a secular state, not in the sense of it being atheist, it's the state, not the society that is secular, but in the sense of neutral, of providing a level playing field for all beliefs and religions. So secularism does not mean, as opponents disingenuously suggest, that religions are barred from the public arena, only that they enter it on the same terms as everyone else, without traditional deference to religious views, and that decision makers in government or elsewhere pay no attention to purely religious arguments, because they mean nothing to people who do not share those beliefs. This is a form of society that is ultimately respectful of human rights for everyone. So what's the alternative? The alternative can only, by definition, be privilege for one group over another. Of course, we can't expect our opponents always instantly to agree to this analysis. In the Nazi against Italy case in the European Court of Human Rights, which was concerned, you remember, with the law in Italy that all classrooms had to display a crucifix on the wall, there was a group of our opponents centered on a group of ultra-right-wing American Catholic lawyers who seriously and influentially argued that a blank wall is no more neutral than one with a crucifix on it. It may seem ludicrous, but they put this forward in all seriousness, and it clearly had some influence. But how better, having observed that individuals have very different beliefs and views, should we organise society than by developing the idea of a plural democracy, not just unfettered majority rule, but collaborative decision-making limited by respect for those vital interests of others, their human rights, that we recognise should be infringed only with reluctance or not at all. Is this humanist view of human rights as aspirations, as declarations, a reductive account? In some sense it is, but it's also magnificent. It's a structure of thought and behaviour that we, human beings, we extraordinarily evolved cousins of the apes, have created for ourselves, for our own well-being and our thriving. So we can happily accept that the language of human rights is that assertion, a declaration of aspiration. We can accept